What's up, bikers? Episode 205 of the Biker Bar podcast live stream. I haven't said that in a while. Anyways, the Biker Bar podcast, episode 205. Today we have Outbound Lighting. And if you guys have been watching or listening for a while, we're going to have Tom on, and always a good conversation with those guys. Before we get started, though, let's talk about some channel sponsors. We got to do this because this is the agreement that I made. And actually, I really like the support, man. It's good to have the support. So thanks to everybody out there that is a member or a Patreon member. Honestly, you guys are the number one supporters of the channel. Those of you guys that are just watching or listening, you're the number two, and coming in 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 or whatever the hell the rest of them are. I can't count. So Cyber Monday over at Ari Bikes, right? Everybody knows that is still going on. And depending on what brand. But what I wanted to mention was the other day on Backpedal that Ari has this Cascade Peak. It's like their aluminum kind of cost-friendly, budget-friendly bike. Well, I wonder if that just screwed up the way that looked. Oh, I don't know. Can't see it if I move it over there. Anyways, so it's aluminum bike. It's like the short travel version or the aluminum version of the pink bike that I've been riding. So about a 135, 120, something like that. What's it say here? You think I would have memorized this? Yeah, 135, 140. So a little bit shorter on the fork than the pink bike that I'm riding. But anyways, $1,700, $1,800. Basically out the door right now for their budget build. So I think that's pretty rad, man. Honestly, that's quite the bargain. $1,800. So you're thinking about getting into mountain biking, thinking about picking up a different bike. Maybe you got a long travel bike and you want something that pedals a little better, but you don't want to spend a lot of money. Right now's the time. Anyways, they got some good financing over there too as well. And yeah, check that out. I think it's a pretty rad build for $1,800. Anyways, check this out. My internet's slow. Over at TascoStoke.com, they just released a little small batch of this double-sided jersey that I've been talking about. So the one side's got about 1 billion colors on it. Looks pretty fun. And the other side's just kind of like a plain red. Almost looks like it's a red camo. So matching socks and gloves. Good stuff there. They even got some youth sizes. You want to pick up some ODI grips that kind of match. You want to go full out matchy. Swing by TascoStoke.com. Use code BIKER, B1KER, and save some money. Anyways, also this week, another new product. Feels like everybody's just it's like the Sea Otter of December. Everybody's launching new products for this time of year. Is Cali. They just brought out these new knee pads, and so they have like a pull-on kind of soft over a hard shell. They have a new shin, but the one that I used to wear all the time was the Strikes, and they kind of updated them to make them a little bit more of a heavier duty knee pad. And yeah, so I haven't tried them out yet, but they look pretty sick. And if you're looking for a little bit more protection, if you're looking for less protection, they now have the Mission 2 in elbow and knees. And I really like the Mission 2. Just a really lightweight pad, so you can just pull it up, and if you're doing some XC riding, you're not really worried about getting too crazy, or you're doing something where you just want to make sure you're not going to take the skin off your knees. These are decent for that. And they also have these in youth as well. Use code B1Cali30, save 30%. And let's talk to Tom and stop talking about sponsors. What's up, Tom?
How's it going?
Dude, I'm stoked to talk to you, man. It's been forever since we talked. We were trying to do the math beforehand, but neither one of us are really good at that. So
it's been a while. I've seen you at multiple bike events since the last time we talked on here. That's for sure.
Yeah, man. How have you been doing some still, or is it like that time of the season's completely over?
Yeah, so we, like always, we're just kind of slammed keeping up with business. So we don't go to a whole lot of events. We've got our kind of bread and butter events that we go to every year. 24 Hours of Old Pueblo, we're at no matter what. And Sedona Mountain Bike Fest, just because it's an awesome, fun event. And it's easy to be at because it's just close by and good timing right after Old Pueblo. And then Sea Otter. Everybody has to be at Sea Otter. If you're not there, then you don't count.
Right.
And beyond that, we've had a couple of events that like 24 hours in the Enchanted Forest with Zia Rides has been a great event. 25
Where's
hours
that?
Hollow. Enchanted Forest is in Gallup, New Mexico,
Oh,
on the west side. It's
interesting.
at 7,000 feet, I think. It's up there. It's a pretty nice course, really well put on event. I've enjoyed that quite a bit. The past this year, between that and 25 hours of Frog Hollow, it was tough for us to actually physically make it out there. Drive halfway across the country and take all the time to do it. But next year we're looking to get back to that. We've provided some demo lights and gotten support out there, so they have parts to help people get through the race and have a good time. But next year we'll be back out there in force, and then we'll see. I hired a new customer service manager, Jason, so he's helping out a lot with events, which is enormous. And so with that, we should be able to support more in the future, but it really just kind of depends on time of year. It's night riding season, right? But it's also not bike event season, not as much going on, which is fine because this is also the busiest time of year for us. Just everybody's dark and depressed and wants to get out and ride. So
yeah, exactly. Do you guys see like a big uptick for like Christmas time, or I don't know if it's the same for that for mountain biking stuff as it is for other retail?
Yeah, so we're the bike industry in general is very seasonal. Spring sales tick up all the way through summer, and then they fall off once it gets cold and dark. Our seasonality is exactly inverted from that. So our peak season, we basically sell very little product from March through July because we're mostly North America based. 90% in the U.S. So the only places that actually buy lights in the summer in the US or in Arizona, where it's really freaking hot. And so
I was going to say that those guys get up at like 5 a.m. and go ride, or 4 a.m. or something like that. And it's still 95.
Yep. Yeah. When I was living there would be morning rides where we'd be riding an hour before the sun comes up and it's over 100 degrees already. But it's bearable because it's dry and you don't have the direct sunlight, which is brutal because you don't get shade anywhere. There's no trees. You can't hide behind a saguaro. It's different. So a little bit in SoCal, but kind of like the more desert terrain where it's really hot in summer, you get people night riding. Otherwise, for us, peak season comes October, November, December. It's a huge part of our revenue, and so if we're not prepared for then that's not good. So we spend a lot of time trying to build really consistently throughout the year so that we can have things charged up, ready to go, and we're not like scrambling to produce at a like 5x rate for 3 months and then kind of sit on our hands for several months. So it's a lot of logistical choices to make that happen. But I'm really just glad that we're not in an industry where we have like seasonal trends. Like our lights aren't going to go out of style 6 months from now. We don't have to have like a new floral print version or anything. So it's good. It helps things stay relevant so we can build in advance and kind of have a better business model.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sure some of the brands out there that are like gloves and stuff like that, where their styles have to change constantly. It's got to be a little bit more of a ebb and flow that way, because you're like, oh, I made this design that I think is sick, but nobody else does.
Yep. Yeah, they go. Clothing is a really difficult business. My buddy Austin at Cognitive, I think you talked to him.
Yeah, he was on the show before.
Yeah, he does a really good job with his approach to business, but it's still just a really tough industry. Making clothing, anything in the U.S. where like something like 2% of clothing is made here domestically, and then there's seasonal trends. There's a million different SKUs because you have different colors, sizes, fits, all of it for everybody. That's hard. Anybody who can do that well, tip of the cap.
Yeah. At least your lights are the same for boys as they are for girls. And like, it's black or maybe gray.
Correct. And you don't get a choice between black and gray. It's just whatever we decide to change it to. So
right.
Yeah. Having 4 SKUs makes things a lot easier. Doesn't make it easy. Right now we're we're out of stock on our brand new light that we just launched because the demand has been good, but we've got one part from one vendor that's held up, and that means we can't build the lights. So we've got the lights 95% done, waiting for us to put the top shell on.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about, I saw the banner on the website whenever I was swinging by looking for some pictures. And so the new light is the portal.
Yep.
And other than me, who is it for?
Other than you. That's right, because we've had this conversation before, where for your type of riding, where it's a lot more real high speed, straighter line, you need to see a lot further out in front of you, where you're probably realistically hitting 30 miles an hour once in a while on those descents.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
as long as the lights are bright enough.
Right. You're hitting 30 and then a very abrupt stop.
Yeah.
So Portal is kind of meant to fill a gap for a bunch of different use cases for us. So we have our Evo handlebar light. I have show and tell, so I can at least point these things out. But we have our Evo handlebar light, and then we have our Hangover helmet light. We've had these as the package for a while now, and we really, tried to push them to be really optimized for their specific mounting location. So this is the helmet light and the bar light. And
so those of you guys that are listening, the bar light is probably about, I don't know, what is that, like maybe 1.5 inches tall, almost 2 inches tall by 3.5 inches wide. Whereas the helmet light is about the same width, but half the height.
Oh yeah, because there's going to be people listening to this that aren't able to see video. Yeah. Keep that in mind. Yes, Hangover is smaller and a lot lighter weight, so a lot less strain on your neck. And we can go more into depth about design details and things like that as it makes sense. But the Portal is kind of in between those two. So the primary function of this is essentially for your use case, where you are looking for something to see further out that had more punch than Hangover does. So Portal is primarily shipping stock as a helmet light setup, but we also have it's a standard GoPro mount style interface, but we have that as a swappable piece, so that you could just take that off and then put our handlebar mount interface on there to use it on the bars. And the reason we did that, couple reasons.
Did that just click in? Did that just click in, or did you have like some kind of?
There's a little screw under there. I just had it out because I've been messing around with it. But yeah, it's got some retaining features and stiffening ribs that lock into the shell, and then there's a screw to secure it. So you basically choose which one you want to use it on. You set it up like that, and then you have the quick release mechanism to snap it off the bar super quick. But the two primary use cases for that would be people riding much higher speed, gnarlier, steeper trails. Someone like Remy, who's riding a bunch of insanely steep stuff where you go up to a rock edge and your bike is pointing straight out, but you're about to go basically straight down. Your bar light really can't do a whole lot in that situation. So you're dependent more on the helmet light. And a lot of the Pacific Northwest riding, like I'm in Bellingham, the riding out here is steep. And you need to be able to see down into the chute before you drop into it. So that is one of the primary motivating use cases for this product. And then the other we saw is just a more economical.
So you're saying it has a better like just downward lighting than the old one?
No, sorry, good question. So Portal versus Hangover. Portal has 60% more center beam intensity. So that just means it's throwing much further down the trail. So if you need to see brighter further out, and when you're dependent on just the helmet light, then Portal is going to give you that power.
Got it.
So I think the overwhelming majority of use cases, typical trail rides for people, especially night rides, people get by with Evo and Hangover just fine.
Whenever I've ridden the regular setup, so that's the Evo and Hangover, whenever I've ridden with that in trees that are tighter and like normal kind of like just normal trail situations, instead of the high speed downhill stuff, like it's definitely very bright. Like there's an area that we ride in called Rockville it's a pretty small park, but but everything's pretty tight, twisty turny. Like if you're having a fast, long downhill, you're maybe, you know, like 2 or 3 minutes, sort of like Bentonville, you know what I mean?
Right. Oh yeah.
And I noticed like the light is then like bouncing off of a lot of stuff. So it's like bouncing off the trees and the leaves and the rock, you know, like, so it feels a lot brighter. But whenever you would be in maybe in a more wide open spot, that was the spot where it's like, hey, I'm trying to like cook 20 plus miles an hour.
Yeah.
That's where I would notice it kind of like, it would make me feel like, oh, I just want to see a little bit further than I can, you know?
Yep. Yeah. And I think that the portal fills that gap essentially.
Yeah.
The people who can tolerate a little bit extra weight because they're not doing a 8-hour endurance ride, but they need the power when they need the power for certain sections of their downhills. This will be a good fit for that.
So same functionality as the old lights. It still has the ability to like charge on the go and
yeah, all the same feature sets. We started adding a few things to help clear up or communicate better. So like the I can plug it in and show you, but the status lights, the indicator lights, they'll show you battery status while you're riding. Now, when you're pass-through charging, they'll turn blue to tell you that it's actively getting power from the power bank, so you know everything is working. Because that was something before where it didn't change to tell you the power bank was plugged in and charging while you're riding, because we didn't want it blinking at you incessantly while you're riding.
Right.
But little things just to help kind of keep it more clear and address.
So there's four lights on the top, and if I remember correctly, it's like if all 4 are lit, like when you're first changing sections, then it's saying that it's in like kind of auto mode, and then like 3 lit is like high beam, middle, and then low.
Yeah, so it actually starts. It'll show you just one indicator for the mode.
Okay,
we keep the others lit up at very low intensity, so you can tell which indicator is actually lit. Right. But the idea is that it always turns on an adaptive, and then you've got high, medium, low. So that's the 2 primary types of riders are ones that just turned on and they don't care if there's modes. They don't know if there's modes. They just want to have it work and have it feel bright for as long as possible. So that's why we wanted to turn on an adaptive first, because that's kind of the case where the consumer knows the least about it and they just want it to go. They just turn it on and go. We want to put them in a position where it's the best scenario, but it also just kind of fulfills the more cross-country use case where you're kind of moving and pedaling at a decent speed the whole time. You don't want to constantly be messing with output just to change your battery life. So adaptive makes the most sense there. And then for the enduro style riders who are trying to get a longer ride with a really intense downhill at the end of it, you want to make sure that you have full power for the downhill, not for the climb on the way up. So those, you can just turn it down to low. It's plain to see, the 50 feet in front of you need for a 3 mile per hour climb. And then you can put it on high, separate from adaptive, where it maintains 100% no matter what. So even if your battery is nearly dead, you can still get 100% until it can't give it anymore. It's not going to be tapering off to some lower value.
Yeah. Have you guys considered using like a percentage instead, or like a runtime, like on a little LCD, or like why just the blocks?
Mainly because the overwhelming majority of people don't need that. They don't need a percentage exact output, but also because the type of person that does want that and does need that, they're going to measure it. And if it's off by 2 minutes, they're going to complain to us that something's wrong. And there's nothing wrong. It's just that monitoring battery status in a product like this is challenging. There's variability between cell to cell, light to light, temperature, the temperature of the light, the ambient temperature. A lot goes into it. And it's not that we can't do it accurately. It's that there's always some variability, and we don't need that level of accuracy. It's kind of like how a lot of cars will have the mileage remaining for your range, and I know like Subaru will do it in increments of 5 miles. You either have 25 miles remaining or 30. You never have 26 or 27. It's because they feel like that's accurate enough because it's kind of a projection based on current conditions and driving and all that.
Yeah, Tesla just tells you an exact number, but then it's always wrong.
Correct. And so many complaints they get about that, like all the time. So having a screen, I'm not saying we're not going to do that, but it adds this layer of complexity and it adds additional cost, which we don't want to add for something that most people don't want. So for our primary product line, we want it to be as simple and dead nuts reliable as possible so that people aren't priced out of the product for something they didn't want in the first place.
I was reading a post the other day and there was some guy on like whatever forum or Facebook or something like that. And the guy was like, I want to get into night riding. I don't want to buy Outbound. It's too expensive, but I want to get like lights, you know. Do you guys have a plan of maybe something that's like a more of a budget friendly, or is it like we don't need to go there? That's just not what our cup of tea is.
You know, that is a great question. I feel like every single question that you ask me, I feel compelled to say, well, it depends. There's nuance. And it's a complicated answer.
We can do it. Depends, man. We got plenty of time, dude.
There should always be room for nuance and discussion, especially in this day and age where everything is a one-liner or yes or no. So budget is different for everybody, right? I think personally that our lights are priced in a reasonable range for what you get. There are a lot of people, as you alluded to, that fundamentally disagree with that for any number of reasons, either because they think they can make something better themselves for less money, or because they can get something that's advertised as the same on Amazon for $20, or
dude, you could totally get 8,000 freaking lumens for $25. I mean, seriously.
you can. And it's not that everything on Amazon is bad. It's just that there's a lot of crap to wade through to get to the good stuff. Yeah. And once you get to the good stuff, you realize that if you're trying to buy a light that's made here and designed here and is high performance and is reliable and comes with lifetime coverage, and it adds up. Like it costs money to do all of those things. I
bought one of those cheap lights before just to kind of see like what you got. Yeah. And first of all, like any of the mounting situations were horrible. And the second thing was 100% like at that time, it was before you guys were out. I was using Night Rider lights, and I think that one that I bought for like $30 said it was 3,000 lumens, and it wasn't even as bright as my 1800 like that I had from Night Rider. Yeah. So it was like, well, I don't know where they're counting their lumens at, or like half of them go on break or something like that. But like,
the marketing is a whole other thing. There's no regulation around this sort of thing. It's like we need regulation on the health insurance industry before we need it on bike lights, right? So I don't see that changing anytime soon. You're still going to get a lot of companies that are just trying to sell as many of a thing as possible, and it's a race to the bottom. So back to your original question, we are not racing to the bottom. We have no plans to release a $25 light, mainly because we can't make a product that we think is good enough at that price and still keep our doors open, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think a $25 light is where it's at. And I want to like be transparent. Like, I think your lights are priced perfectly for what you get 100%. And even on that post that I was talking about, I was one of the many people saying, you get what you pay for, man. Just spend the money. Like, what was that old saying? It's like buy once, cry once, you know, like just do it, you know, because at the end of the day, it's worth it. And then the second part of it to me is like those same people are also the ones that are like, oh, I only want one light, I don't need two. And it's like, yes, you do. Because let me tell you about any time back in the day when I was riding with one light and I found out what happens when that one turns off, it is terrifying.
Yeah, especially when you're rolling the dice with cheaper product too, where maybe 8 times out of 10 that $25 light is fine, but it's not 99 out of 100. It's 8 out of 10 maybe, and when it's not good, it's real bad. It's
definitely one of those ones too where you're like, oh, it's raining now. Is this really waterproof? I mean, like,
no, it's not. What you said made me think of two of my favorite phrases. It's you get what you pay for, whether it's cheap or expensive.
Yeah.
We try to approach it from that angle. Is we don't want to make a product that doesn't have support. Support costs money, so we're baking that into the product so that if you have a problem 4 years from now, where you crash and you break something, we're just going to take care of it. We're not going to charge you for shipping or a service fee, because we can afford to do that. And also because we design a reliable enough product, we don't have to replace them every year. We don't have to service every single customer's lights. If we did, then our public warranty coverage plan would be a really bad business decision. But so far, it's working out really well. And the other quote, I think it was Ira that said it. I'm too broke to buy cheap shit. You buy it once, you buy it multiple times. It's like, oh, it's so cheap, I could just buy 10 of them. It's like, well, but you might have to. And then you have to go through that many. And then you're paying the same amount for a worse experience every time. It's, not everybody needs to buy a light set like ours. That's for sure. But the people who are already spending money on their bikes, who spend a lot of time on their bikes, who ride a lot at night in the winter, there's so many ways to justify it. And it, when you start looking at like an amortized cost, it's not that much in the grand scheme of things. So to your question, we will have some more, once we fill out our whole product line, our portfolio, we'll have some more options across the full spread. We'll have some higher performance ones with more features like wireless remotes and things like that. And then we'll have some more budget friendly options where we can kind of flex our economies of scale a bit more, and kind of design with the point of making it similar performance, but as cost effective as possible. But that's part of why, right now we're in the process of hiring 2 engineers. We'll probably have another couple more hires early next year. We're kind of taking a big step right now to essentially double the size of our team so that we can get new products out faster. And so we can kind of fill out that whole portfolio, and people can stop asking us if we're going to have a tail light, because we'll have one.
Well, I guess I should cross that question off.
Yes, it's in the works. It's coming. It's actually pretty close. It's part of the reason we're hiring engineering support, is that right now Matt and myself are the engineers. We do all of the design work between the electronics and mechanicals and opticals, and we also have 12 other jobs each to do every day, and so we have very few hours in the week to devote to development. And so things just kind of, we don't want to rush something to market, so it just takes longer to get out. And I think we're big enough now. We're 6 people. We're big enough. We've got a large enough customer base now that we can really take this next big step and push forward and grow. And I think that being able to get more product covering more use cases, more customers, will really just make the whole experience better, because it'll be a solution for everything within our product family. But we definitely need people in-house to do that, so that instead of answering customer service emails and doing media stuff and doing product testing and whatever, I can focus on design work, or we have an engineer who can do that.
Yeah. When I first started talking to you, you guys were brand new on the market, so your like percentage of market share was very low. You guys have been around now long enough that pretty much anytime I see like a post online that is mentioning what lights to buy, it's your name that I see mentioned instead of some of those other brands like Knight Rider was before. Like, to me, I think they were the old go-to.
Yeah.
Where do you guys feel like, where are you guys at, like, as far as like the market goes now? Do you feel like you're like sharing it with them, or you're still like the little guy?
Little of both. It's hard to know for sure, just in terms of number of customers. I don't know how many lights Knight Rider sells per year. We can make assumptions on that based off calculated guess, looking at some container ships that we know carry their product. So we know how many pounds of product they're getting shipped into the US every year, so we can kind of guess. But I think in terms of total market share, we're still pretty small. We still have plenty of room to grow. But it is quite flattering to hear the kind of consumer response, where we have really loyal and vocal customers, and I do not take that for granted. We put a lot of time and effort into that, and I think that's pays in a large part to the customer service side of it, where obviously if the product sucks, it doesn't matter. So the product is really good, we did that. But then if you don't back it up, or if you don't help people get the solutions they need, or help them deal with a challenging mounting situation because of a bike packing rig from the 70s or whatever, you don't develop this kind of connection with the customer, where we enjoy it. We think it's cool to be able to see all these unique use cases out there, and all the ways that our products are getting used to really benefit people, where they couldn't do what they were doing before without our product. And that's fucking awesome. So
yeah, totally.
time to answer questions like, hey, I don't know how to get this mounted. Great, let's figure it out. Oh, there's nothing for that. Let's see if we can 3D print something to help make that happen. Not that we offer custom design mounting services for every single bike on earth, but it's worth it to take some time to do that. And I think that just kind of helps people get to know us a bit, and what we value, and they like that. So I'm not saying that Knight Rider doesn't do that. I don't personally have a lot of interaction with Knight Rider. And they've been the name in town for 3 decades, like 30 years now, I think. And it's they didn't get there by having a bad product or bad support.
Right.
I think we're trying to take that up a notch, and kind of go above and beyond on the support side, and really connect with people. And I think that's what makes a big difference.
I feel like they're like, and this is just my perspective as a consumer, I feel like their brand is now like, they have so many options that are like, how do I say this? Like, it makes it seem like because they have some super cheap and like easy for the regular Joe Schmo guy that's just like riding over to the grocery store or something like that, because they have those, it gives you almost this feeling that like, oh, that's not going to be good for the purpose that I want.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Like and how you set up a product portfolio to kind of serve your purposes as a business is very different. You can have different approaches to that. Having different levels within the same product, where you get a product that's, say, 10% brighter for $20 more or whatever. That's a choice that we decided not to make, because we wanted everything to be simpler. And because there's certain features like that we just really don't think are worth the extra $20. If you're at 1,000 lumens, paying $20 more to get to 1,200 is not really going to enhance your experience. And honestly, for that product, there's probably not a lot of actual cost savings in the cost of goods to manufacture it. It's essentially a manufactured value add, where you're just adding cost and enabling this feature, turning up the firmware, what have you, to charge more. And we just thought, screw it, let's keep it as simple as possible. Within each product family, there's one version. It's the one we think makes the most sense for the most people. But then having a significantly lower power, smaller battery, rubber band style mount for commuting, there's value in that. That's not why we don't have one right now. But we think there's potentially ways to improve on that and add some more value without adding more cost. And I think that some of those products are more focused on volume than they are on margin. So they drive the price really aggressively down to basically get as many out the door as possible, knowing that they're not actually making as much money off of each one. And so they can't provide the same level of support, perhaps. But that also helps with economies of scale. Anytime you're producing 5 times as many of a thing, it's going to cost you less. So there's a lot of different approaches and end goals. I mean, us as a company, we're not here to have everyone on Earth use our lights. We don't think that everybody on Earth that rides a mountain bike needs to use our lights. We would like most to, I think. We would like to get a lot more of these out into the field. but it's good to have options out there. Some people prefer different design aesthetics. You know, like Glowworm makes some good external battery pack lights. They're high quality, but a completely different design philosophy from us. And if that's what you like, there's an option for you that's high quality and good. And I think because of that, that drives a lot of our product decisions as to what we think has value in the market, what we think brings value to a customer, and what we need to see for our company to be successful. So we're trying to, essentially start with that middle product line. That's the base functionality for the high performance bracket. Below that, there's lower cost, lower performance for, like commuter lights. We could have a debate about whether or not commuter lights should be low end or not. But the fact is that a lot of people commute on cheap old bikes, either because they're commuting by bike and trying to save money, or because they don't want their bike to get stolen. Whatever the case, if you have a $300 commuter bike, you probably don't want to put a $300 light on the front of it. And that's fine. So having something, sub $100 for commuters makes a ton of sense. And we see value there.
But I mean, like with your mounting system, like what's it matter? Because I 100% have like what I call my bar bike, which I don't really use it for that anymore. But like I have a single speed that it's like, yeah, we'll go to like the farmer's market with it, or it's the one I use to run the dog, and if it got stolen, I'd be like irritated. But realistically, like there's been a few times where I've thought about selling it because it's taking up space in my garage. I'm like, I'm only going to get $100 for it. I'm not selling that bike, But like the way your light is, like if I wanted to ride that at night, I mean that handlebar mount is like just pop it off and then I'm taking it in my pocket.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Obviously, thank you for selling our lights for us. But I'm more alluding to the fact that a lot of people who are like saving money commuting by bike in the city, they probably don't have the budget for that, or might not. And so it's not about the ability to prevent it from being stolen very quickly and easily. It's more just about the initial expense. And so if we can make something that kind of serves their needs, where say in a generally brightly lit urban environment, you've got street light coverage. You don't need the light itself to be as powerful. You just need it to make kind of a halo around you so that people can see you're a bicycle from a distance. And so you can see through dark spots and potholes and that sort of thing. We can do that less expensively from a design standpoint than we can Evo, which is much higher power, much more robust, because it's going to be crashed headfirst into trees, because people do that on mountain bikes. Right. And so we could design a product for commuters that's lower end technically, just because it's lower price. That does not mean lower quality or less support or anything like that. It's a different set of requirements from our current product line, essentially.
Yeah. I think the other thing that, and I'm not just trying to like get on and bash Night Rider, but I'm just trying to think of like the reasons that I went away from their lights, and like that like also falls in line with the reason that I liked yours, and it's like I felt like they weren't really like, it felt like they had like this design that they were like, oh, we're not changing it because people keep buying it, and it was like you're carrying this big battery, or like it wasn't aesthetically like the greatest looking thing on top of your helmet, or like didn't really consider, hey, I'm mountain biking with this, like let's make it lower profile so it doesn't catch trees and stuff, and
right.
And it feels like those are things that you guys really pay attention to, and that means a lot as a customer. Like, like for instance, when I use your road bike light, what's that one called?
Detour.
The gravel light, the Detour.
Yeah.
The little lights that are on the side that just make it so that I could see my handlebars were like so good. It was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Like I can look down and
useful.
like, what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and I have so much to say to that. This is not going to be a Night Rider bash session, and they've done a lot to improve their products over the years, but they did kind of get locked into a design aesthetic 10, 11-ish years ago, and it has fundamentally not changed, which you could argue is good and you could argue is bad. Currently, to give them some credit, we're kind of in that same space here with Hangovers coming up on 6 years of age. We have changed the lower shell. We've changed every single part of that light internally. And we make rolling updates, but we just didn't launch as a, hey, here's new 2024 model year, because it was small improvements that we didn't feel like we needed to say, hey, this is so much better, you need to buy a new one to replace your old one. We don't like that. It's obviously a bad business strategy to tell people not to buy a new version of your product. But if you have a light that works, and it works well, like, you don't need to upgrade.
There were some small changes to the head mounted one. I remember like something on the sides where it's kind of where you grab it. You can, because that's how I can tell which one's my old one and which one's my new one. It's like, there's like little finger holes kind of on the side of it. That's the only thing that I personally noticed with the difference, but I'm sure there's probably more to it than that.
Yeah, and the little dive chamfers on the side of the body. We did that because of how we were manufacturing that. We changed from a cast magnesium lower shell to this thermally conductive polymer, which had a number of improvements from reducing weight, reducing cost, improving surface finish, tightening up tolerances like crazy, because cast materials with a powder coat is just not high tolerance manufacturing. Lots of reasons to switch, and it made it a little slimmer, dropped it down 2 millimeters lower. So you talk about being lower profile on the helmet. We were really trying to eke out every little bit there so that you're even less likely to snag on branches. And I think that's where you alluded a bit to it, why you feel like their products have been kind of stale, haven't really improved much. They've been very similar. That's kind of how we started with Hangover, was taking a Knight Rider Lumina, because it's one of the most popular bike lights ever made. Very high seller in the US, probably the most popular in the US, and basically made a list of features of everything about it, from the ergonomics, the weight, the mount mechanism, the battery status indicator, the shape of the button, the lockout mode, all of this, and just tried to, in our design, be better in every single category. At least what we thought was better. Having a button that's just as easy to press, but harder to press accidentally. And then designing the optics so that if it accidentally turns on inside your gym bag, it's not going to melt a hole through all of your clothes. It'll just get warm. And making the mount even lower profile, and having the battery status indicator be something more than just red or blue, where it's just good or bad. So it was not just and I think that not just in terms of making something better, but finding those kind of pain points for people that bothered them. Like, the mount is always wiggly, and they can see the wiggle while they're riding on trails. Like, okay, well, let's make that something they can't complain about, where it doesn't wiggle. So we took all the rubber out of our mounts so that everything is solidly mounted. We have a cam mechanism so that even as it wears over time, it can always take out the play, so it never develops a wiggle. Because once you have a wiggle and you let it go on a trail, it just gets worse and worse and worse until you can't control it at all.
You guys have the GoPro mounting system, and you use like a sort of concave mount that you guys have that just uses the sticky to put it on the helmet. Do you have an option that's not a sticky version, like a strappy version?
We don't, because there's already 1,000 of them on the market, because it's a GoPro standard. So right now we basically don't ship with strap mounts, because they're more expensive, they're bulkier, they don't hold as well. You get the VHB tape stuck, it's on there and it's not wiggling or moving at all. It's just as susceptible to variations in vent geometry on the helmet. There's a lot of helmets where you can't put a strap mount on them. From cross-country aero helmets to full face downhill helmets where there aren't any vents. Some have vents in weird locations where the only place to mount it is like right on your forehead or way in the back. So we thought, all right, if we can make the sticky mounts and make more options for the different helmets, we can make that less expensive to have multiple mounts. It'll be more robust and stable and lower profile. And we just liked it better. But eventually, we're getting to the size now where we could probably just source our own strap mounts. I've just been telling people, if they really want a strap mount, there is nothing wrong with that. they can go buy one from GoPro for $15. And
what if you do you guys print those yourself, or do you have those manufactured?
The different shape mounts.
Yeah.
We used to 3D print them because we were small, and it just made sense. We were making constant tweaks and changes. You know, our cable managers for Evo, we're still 3D printing these guys because the geometry is a bit weird, and this is the 12th iteration of this design where we keep changing it because every bike is different, all cable routing situations are different, and so the more data we get, the more we can tweak it, and we can just change the print file for the next production run instead of modifying or cutting a new mold, which makes it much more expensive. So if we were a massive company, we were selling 50,000 of these a year, then we'd mold everything.
I need to get those little cable things. I didn't realize he sold something like that.
I know a guy. I'll get you hooked up. What
do you guys use to print? What material do you print that in?
So that's SLS nylon 11. It's very specific. So SLS,
pretty strong,
it's pretty strong. And the nice thing about SLS and MJF actually have pretty similar material properties, is that they're relatively homogeneous axially. So a lot of 3D printing, you get good XY strength in the print plane, but then your Z-axis strength is bad because the adhesion between layers is not as strong.
Right.
SLS doesn't really have that. It's damn near homogeneous, which also means that like the part geometry is not as critical to design around the printing method. Whereas if we made this cable manager with an FDM printer, I'm trying to show it in front of my face where you can kind of see it, the orientation that it gets printed at means you're going to have a weak point in some part of the prong of the design.
Okay.
That's not good. So we kind of need really homogeneous printing, but then also we want these to be flexible so that when you crash or turn your bars too tight and your cables are real tight, they pop out instead of ripping the cable and damaging something on your bike or breaking the cable manager. And a lot of 3D printed materials are pretty brittle. So making it out of nylon 11, even instead of nylon 12, they're both versions of PA6 nylon. Nylon 12 is stronger, but more brittle. So it's worse for this application. So we actually have to use nylon 11, which is more expensive to use. But I think with Evo V2, will be, when we redesign that and release the next edition of it, we're going to go ahead and mold that part. We see probably 20% of bikes right now need it, but we're getting to the volume where it makes sense to mold that sort of thing. And
will you just put that wire cable manager just in every box, or will you keep it as an upgrade?
When we tool it, we'll probably put it in every box. Then it'll make sense. This is a tough one that we've battled with from the beginning.
Because you're adding cost that you could like pass that on to the consumer if they don't want it, or basically what it comes down to, right?
Oh my God. If you want to talk about something that drives me up the wall, the comment that we get is, oh, for $245, it should have everything included with it. And it's like, no, just because it costs money doesn't mean everything else that you want is free. Like it costs money to make all of these things. So if you want me to throw in an extra mount, I'm going to charge you for that. I'm not doing it out of the goodness of my heart. It's not like they magically fall into our pocket.
Yeah, and if you don't need it, then you're going to be pissed off that you're charging that much, and you got all these stupid mounts that you don't need. You're never going to make everybody happy.
No, and it just really chaps me too, because like we're in such a consumerist culture, and we have so much waste and garbage. And the last thing that we want is to produce more plastic garbage. And whether you are a diehard conservationist or not, we don't need to make more plastic garbage. Like it's just dumb. It's wasteful because it costs us money to do that, and it costs energy and materials, and then it just ends up going to a landfill. And if it's plastic, it's never gonna break down. So
personally, I feel like if the part is priced appropriately, like I don't mind buying them separately. Like in my mind, it'd be like, oh, I'd rather see that light sell for 220 than 245 and me get a bunch of mounts that I don't need.
Yep.
And then I just have to choose the $5 mount that I want. And if there's 4 of them in the box and like that's the difference of the cost, you know, like if it's even exactly the same, you know what I mean? Then I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine, you know, like, but I would hate to like be making the like have to pay more for something that I don't want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what we come back to every time is we don't want to price people out by adding in a bunch of stuff just to drive up our margins or value add. We'd rather have people get the stuff and then figure out, well, hopefully we can help them figure out what they need before they buy everything. Right. So we get it the first time. But you know, like the spare mounts, a strap mount costs $15 from GoPro. I think it's actually $20 now. But we make the stick-on mounts $5. So for the cost of one strap mount, you can have 4 helmets set up. We feel like that's a reasonable cost. But then, you know, people are like, oh, well, I didn't get the right one for my helmet the first time, and now I got to pay for shipping again. It's like, yeah, you know, ask us. We're happy to help. And a lot of times if people are nice, we'll just cover the shipping and just send them the part because we're not here to nickel and dime people to death. I say that a lot to people in emails where they get frustrated because they had to buy something they didn't realize they needed in the first place, or like because we didn't include
with those mounts. The reason I originally asked you about why if you printed them was because in my mind I was like, oh, if you offer different colors, that might be a selling point. Because like for me, for example, I have a night riding helmet that I use and that has that sticky thing on it.
Yeah.
And there's been times where I'm like, oh, I want to wear this other helmet, but I don't want to stick another sticky thing on it.
Yeah.
So like if like say that helmet, for example, is white, if I could put a sticky thing on there that's white, then I'd be like, oh, okay, I'll stick it on there.
Yeah, I wonder if we could do small batches of that with the mold too and have it be easy to just dye, have different materials. That's not a bad idea. I actually, that reminds me, I had a customer because at one point I forgot to specify when we were getting the kill managers printed. We have a shop in upstate New York right now that's actually printing those for us, just because they're at a decent volume, and the material needs to be dyed black. Otherwise, it's kind of this dark gray color, which is also kind of on brand. And we got a shipment of 1,000 of them that were all dark gray, and we said, it's on brand still. It's probably not that big a deal. Within a week, somebody had emailed us saying, the picture on your website shows that it's black, and this is not black. I want a refund, and I demand a black one immediately because nothing on my bike is gray. And I'm like, okay, calm down. We can fix this.
Yeah.
Just dial it back a notch, you know? Yeah. So to your point, having some more color options might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Right now, all of our helmet mounts are now tooled. So they're all injection molded. So we, you know, nice glossy, durable finish. And this is actually our newer wide mount where for a lot of the helmets that have the vent gaps in the center where you don't have a good place right in the middle of the helmet to stick a standard GoPro mount. This kind of spans that gap. And what we did with this version is we actually made the sides into flexible wings so that they can kind of conform to the shape of the helmet a bit more, because even within the same model of helmet, different size helmets have different radiuses of curvature. So the mount doesn't fit perfectly flush on some. And so this kind of fixes that problem and helps it fit a lot more different styles of helmets. So now we're actually going to start doing, because we've got enough data now, we've got a notched mount, we've got a wide mount, we've had some ultra curved mounts that we still print on occasion for some weird collie and fly helmets, and then our standard ones. Like 98% need either the wide mount or the standard mount. So we just made the decision, we're going to tool this and we're going to start putting one of each in with every light, every helmet light at least. So it's one additional piece of plastic, but it saves a ton of trouble in terms of customers that just pick up the light thinking it's going to fit and they don't check their helmet, or they don't know there's options, whatever reason. If they get the light, they can't use it out of the box. That kind of sucks. And then they've got to wait for shipping, and then we've got to pay to ship and use the energy to ship something across the country again.
Yeah.
Then the cost of shipping is more than the part. Like, okay, well, maybe it makes sense for this. We make the decision to put that. And so we have two things in the box. But in general, we're trying not to put 1,000 different little, every possible accessory you could need, because like you mentioned, if there's 4 mounts in the box and you're only going to use one of them, that means 3 end up in the garbage and you're paying for those and producing waste. We don't like it.
Yeah, I have like an ammo can full of GoPro mounts that is like all the extras from everything that I've ever bought. And it's like,
yeah,
it's almost full. You know what I mean? It's like full of mounts. And I'm like, they're all things that I just never use. So it's just, you know, interesting.
Yeah, people have a lot of feelings about that. I don't think there's any right answer. I don't know that what we're doing is the right way to do it, but we're trying to keep the cost as low as possible and keep the waste as low as possible. And because we take care of people on the back end, you know, somebody got the wrong mount because they weren't paying attention or didn't know to check, or they just picked the wrong thing, their finger slipped, we'll just take care of them. They just need to talk to us.
So earlier you were talking about battery life on the lights, and it made me kind of think about how many cycles do they get. So your battery isn't removable, at least from the consumer standpoint.
The user. Yep.
Yeah. What's the deal there? Like, could people send it back in and get the battery replaced at some point, or is it like, hey, you used it up? And then also, like, how long is it? How many cycles do they get?
Yeah. Lots of nuance to this question. I'll try to hit the high points.
It depends on which hemisphere you're in. And
well, first I'll say we cover everything. So if you're still using our light 10 years from now and the battery's worn down and we can replace it, we will replace it and we'll cover it. I'll just be stoked that you're still using it. That's awesome.
Right on.
I say that with an asterisk. There's some limitations on that. Like our first product that we ever came out with external battery packs, we stopped making those several years ago. And we're essentially out of warranty support stock now 3 years later. And we're not going to make more of those packs. So there's some options we can point people to, or if we cannot repair an older light, what we've been doing now is offering pretty hefty discount on an upgrade to a current light, which is going to be more repairable down the road. By their nature, the battery packs are going to be easier for us to handle in-house, and we'll be able to keep tooling around for that. So we cover replacements. Just talk to us. Second, I'll say that 9 out of every 10, maybe actually more than that, maybe 19 out of every 20 customers that come to us saying, hey, my light's not holding a charge like it used to, or the runtime is short, they are wrong. They think that it's short because of something. Either it didn't charge fully, or they weren't paying attention to what mode they were in. They were in a different mode from what they thought. There's so many different reasons, but most just kind of perceive it as like, oh, that seems short, I should contact them. It's probably the battery dying, because everybody thinks that lithium-ion batteries just like die at a certain point. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that cell phones are used every single day, and cell phone batteries degrade quickly. So people are they look at their phones like, oh, it's been 2 years, my phone battery's barely working anymore. I'm sure I can expect the same thing from every electronic device. And
you're like, hey, we didn't actually program our firmware to make it last good.
First of all, there's no lawsuits currently open against us for throttling performance to force battery issues. But secondly, like there's 2 main reasons that the cell phones degrade much faster. One, they're lithium polymer packs, not lithium ion. So the battery chemistry is different, and they can handle higher charge and discharge currents, but they degrade faster over charge cycles. So chemistry is different. And then 2, everyone uses their phone every single day, all the time, no matter what. You do not use your bike light 365 times a year. There are very, very few customers. We have one customer who I think actually legitimately used his light enough to cause the battery to degrade like 30%. And he was using it pretty much every day for 4 years. It was awesome. I just got a new light. I was like, this is fucking cool. Send me that one for the museum. But to actually, so the number of cycles it takes for a battery to show 20% reduction in capacity, so to still have 80% of its runtime, for our cells is 1,000 cycles. That means discharge fully to dead, charge fully to 100%, and that's with a fast charger. So if you charge them as fast as possible 1,000 times, which means every day for 3 years straight, you'll probably see 20% reduction in runtime, which is not that much. I would prefer not to replace a battery if it's down to 80%. Like, keep using it and manage the power because it's still good. Don't throw it away just because of that. But if it's really affecting somebody's experience, we'll replace it. So the most common.
I was going to ask in that same light there. So if you have it plugged in and you just leave it plugged in, is that bad for it too? Because my one buddy's like telling me, like, with my e-bike, he's like, if you leave it plugged in, it's not going to work anymore, and like you're going to screw up your battery. And I'm like, dude, I don't know. He's like worried about his house burning down. I'm like, dude, I just plug that shit in, come in like a week later and unplug it.
Yeah, so this speaks to a larger level of like kind of not misinformation, but like negative press makes headlines where like I'm not the biggest Tesla fan, but I will say that they got a real bad rap for their cars being fire hazards because one caught fire way back when and it became news. You know how many fucking GM vehicles catch fire every year?
Yeah, right.
Warranty? It's significantly more. Like the chances of you having an internal combustion engine car catch fire is way higher than an electric vehicle. But everybody's concerned about electric vehicles. And I get that the severity of an electric vehicle fire is different from an ICE car, but it's not a realistic concern for most people. And your buddy talking about the e-bikes, he may have had an experience himself or seen the, like New York apartment building catches fire because of somebody charging their commuter e-bike. This is where we got to get into the weeds of like the reality of the industry. If you're buying an RE e-bike and they've got a Bosch motor on it, you can leave that sucker plugged in. It's going to be fine. Bosch is not messing around with trying to cut costs by reducing safety. They know that would be really dumb and really bad for the company. They'll just charge you more. So there's no risk of that. Same with our lights. We've got charge controllers inside the lights so that it's basically impossible for you to mischarge them. We've got protection circuits on the battery, on the circuit board, and then the charging circuit itself. So even if you had a port failure, it stops at the port. It can't get further in, so it can't cause problems. It's also why we, make sure that our ports are in like the thermally conductive part of the shell, so that if your like USB cable fails and starts melting or something, it can't melt to the light. It can't cause damage to the light that could then lead to bigger problems. And I think
so it doesn't really matter on the charging cycle then, as far as like if you plugged it in at 80%, and is that considered a cycle, or is it like only considered like 20% of a cycle,
Yeah, it's not exactly that, but you can kind of think of it that way. And this is also where we get into detail about like the safe ranges for lithium ion cell. A single lithium ion cell, when it's dead, is 3.2 volts. When it's full, is 4.2. The top 0.2 of a volt are nonlinear. So what that means is that the battery reacts differently to load in those ranges. And so generally speaking, you want to keep it out of those two ranges. So like your phone, your laptop, all of those have like battery smart features where you can set the max charging to 80%. And the idea is that the longer your device sits at 100% full charge, the faster it degrades. But the difference between degradation at 100% versus 0% is way different. Like 100%, I'd much rather somebody leave their light on their charger forever than to leave it at 10% for a couple months.
Really?
By far the most common way that batteries die is somebody runs their light dead, and it's the end of the season, so they stick it in a drawer and they don't touch it for 6 months, and they come back and they can't charge it. And it's because
that's actually, I've had that before. Like I recently gave a buddy of mine an old Garmin that I broke the screen on, and I was like, hey, if you want to replace the screen, you can have it. Like I don't really care. I don't use this thing. I was gonna do it at one point and just never got around to it. And I had said to him like, but I don't know if the battery's good anymore. And it's just because of like what you, and I didn't know that there was actually a reason, like what the reason was, but in my mind, I knew if I left something unplugged for a long time, that even though it was working fine whenever I used it last, for some reason, it'll just not work like down the road.
Yeah. Granted, you're probably riding your e-bike frequently enough that you're not going to worry about that, but don't leave your e-bike sitting there unplugged for 6 months and not touch it. So what's happening is that all these devices, they have a battery connected to the electronics. There's not a physical switch disconnecting them. So the electronics are always powered. And for the most part, most devices these days have really low quiescent current, which is, vampire current, where it's still pulling power all the time to keep the microcontrollers running, to sense when you press a button, to react to inputs. So it's in a sleep mode or something where it's pulling really low power, but it's not zero. So for, like our products, we try to design it so that the quiescent current is low enough that if you fully charge your light, it can sit there for at least 12 months from full charge and not be dead when you come back to it.
Right. So that's the reason that when you plug your whatever in, that you were like, oh, I had it charged and then I threw it in my bag. And then like 3 months later, you pull it out and you're like, dude, it's at 40%. It's because it actually, even though it's air quotes off, it is actually still pulling electricity.
Correct. And that's what kills the cells more often than not. So the overwhelming majority of the time when a customer says that my light's not holding a charge anymore, it's because they stored it dead for months. They only ride for 4 months of the year in the dark, and the other 8 months it's sitting in a drawer and they're not thinking about it. And they come back to it and like, oh, I haven't charged that in a while. And it's dead because it was sitting dead and it's still pulling just a trickle of power for months and months. And so the cell gets below its lower kind of acceptable threshold, and it just keeps going and keeps going. And depending on how far down it gets, that'll either damage the cell where it won't have the available capacity that it used to, or more likely the charging circuitry won't even allow it to attempt to charge because the voltage is too low. So I had a buddy who actually ran into this problem on his Suron, on his E-Moto, where gigantic, super expensive battery pack in that thing, like a $2,000 battery pack. And it was dead, and it was down at like 17 volts, and it should be at 84 or something. And the charger, when you plug it in, it will not charge because it says, yep, the voltage is too low. This is not safe. But he contacted Suron and they said, oh yeah, you need to get a power supply, open the battery, connect the power supply to the battery to kind of jumpstart it to get the charger to see that it's in a safe range, and then it'll start charging again. First of all, don't do that. If you're listening to this, do not do that. It can work, but that's essentially the state batteries are in when they're dead. A lot of the time it's just they're abused, they're down way below the safe threshold, and they can't be recovered properly or safely. So the lesson is, I would much rather you just keep your lights plugged in forever than to, charge them once a year.
Yeah. While we're talking about batteries and e-bikes, you mentioned, is there a way to like hook up to the e-bike power somehow? Is it only certain bikes? I know the bike that I have, at least I don't think there's not like a USB-C somewhere that I can just plug in.
Yeah, and this comes down to my favorite thing about the bike industry, standards. There's already a dearth of standards for regular bikes. We start looking at electric bikes, it's even worse because nobody agreed on anything before they started making mid-drive systems. So Bosch, Shimano, Yamaha, Fazua, DJI, they all have different proprietary connectors that they use. They all have different accessory ports. Some have a high power one, some have one dedicated for lights. Some don't have anything. Some are screw terminals, some are a weird 4-pin thing. Some are 6 volts, some are 12, some are half an amp, some are 1.5 amps. They're all different. So I can make one light and have it fit on, well, I'd say every mountain bike that doesn't have weird, dumb integrated carbon bars like on Scott. E-bikes, I might have to make 6 different versions of that light to accommodate all these different types of e-bikes. And it's challenging, not just from a connector standpoint, where we have to have different different like pigtail leads to connect to that. But the voltage and power limitations, if I wanted something to work on everything, I'd have to cut the power way down so that it doesn't overdrive on the units that only provide 6 watts. So you have a Bosch, you can get 18 watts out of it, but I have to limit it to 6 so it can work on this Yamaha. That means you have a worse product for the Bosch. So you really need multiple different products. And we're working.
Couldn't you just do that with like a secondary like box? Like there's like you come out of that into your e-bike module, and then your e-bike module to your light is your USB-C.
Yeah, but then do you want USB-C to be the connection to the light? Like for self-contained lights, we pass through charge through USB-C. That works great. A lot of people for e-bikes want something that's permanently wired in. It's a dedicated light head.
Okay.
At that point, doesn't need the battery inside of it because it's got the battery in the down tube there. And then
you guys sell something like that? You guys don't sell something like that though, right?
No, we have it in the works, almost done.
Gotcha.
And for that, there's a very specific list of requirements, and people don't want something big and bulky. They want it to be as tight and robust looking part of the bike as possible, especially if it's going to be there all the time.
Right.
But then if you
I guess in my mind, I'd be like, man, no, I want the light to be able to put it on my other bike. But I mean, I'm like first world problems over here with my garage full of bikes.
Right. And that's another thing too, is like, all right, we're talking about standards. Rather than just make it's like 6 versions of a product to fit all the lack of standards in the industry. What if we did make a box or say a port standard for e-bike lights, so that all e-bike lights can just be an open source standard, so that any manufacturer can plug into this port knowing it's going to get them a certain power output.
Right.
That would be awesome, but adding that to existing e-bikes or existing systems means the mid-drive supplier, the Bosches, the Shimanos, they've got to provide enough power for that output from their system, because we can't wire that directly into the battery for 1,000 different, very legitimate reasons. So you kind of have.
Is there a channel for you guys to speak to them that way? I mean, I like when there used to be Interbike, you could go and talk to those vendors, so to speak, and now my assumption is the way that it goes is like DJI or Bosch or Bros or whoever, they have a guy that's like, oh yeah, I'll make a port for the light, and he's just like, what light do you use? I use this one. I'm gonna choose that as what voltage I'm setting it up for or whatever, and then that's that. I don't think that there's like, they're not sending out an email like to all the light manufacturers and being like, hey, what do you guys like?
No, and there's some companies that are forward looking in some aspects of that. But when it comes to the e-bike manufacturers, they don't care. They are not designing around that. They have much bigger design goals, and this is an afterthought. I would say that it's really just industry contacts. Like I've just met a bunch of people at events at got Sea Otter, and then we've got a bunch of people in the industry that use our lights that work for these companies that have made me some really good connections, so we can actually start these conversations.
That's rad.
Like Steve Blick over at Shimano has been hugely helpful. He loves our stuff, super supportive, connecting me with all the right people so we can get specifications and make sure that we're like up to date on what's coming down the pipe, and we can at least provide feedback, whether they listen to us or not. It doesn't matter, but hey, we can at least give it to them. And then I got a bunch of buddies at Ibis. They launched the Oso with a lupine light built in on the front. And I just started a discussion with them about that, because it's not a very good mountain bike light. It's in fact almost a dangerous mountain bike light, because it's designed for commuting, and we could do something way better for a 170 travel bruiser of an e-bike. So I just said, hey, if we make something that's better, will you guys consider putting it on there? And they said, hell yeah. And then I kept getting requests from Ibis employees to make them a better e-bike light for their bikes. And so
you're like, so in order to do this, I need you to send me an Oso that I can,
Well, they did not send me one for free, but I do have one now, and that's what the prototype is on that I've been testing with the Bosch system.
Right on, dude.
And that opened up some conversations with the designer of the bike, who actually lives here in town, and so he's connected me with Bosch so that I can have an open dialogue with them. And as they start like a lot of e-bike companies are considering putting USB-C ports on their bikes for whatever reason, for powering a GPS or phone or whatever. Hey, that could be used for lights, but only if it's high enough power. And to do that through USB-C is non-trivial. You can't just provide 5 volts and have it be good. You kind of either need QC or PD negotiation, which requires a certain chip, and that's usually more expensive and complicated. So getting them to say, all right, here's the minimum for what we need for the lights. Please put that in here. It doesn't always go straight that way, but we can at least have our voices be heard that way. I think Sea Otter's kind of become the Interbike at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like,
it seems that way. Yeah. But I mean, the reason I said Interbike is because like I went to the last one, so it was the only one I ever went to, but I was just like blown away there because it was like the companies that are like making the chips for the e-bike were there. You know what I mean? The companies that were like creating the cells for the batteries for the e-bike were there. So it was like you really had that like all the way in access where like the company that's making the bearings for the headsets was there. You know what I mean? Where like at Sea Otter, it's like that company doesn't care to be there because they're not going to do anything for the regular consumer. And if they show up and buy a tent, they're just like adding the Sea Otter pockets, but they're not really going to get the market that they're after,
Yeah. The market that they're going for is presenting there, but they already have those connections made and scenes. And there's not really a venue for that. We just kind of got to figure it out. So it's, we've made a lot of connections just through Matt and I, through our old like industry connections from Diodynamics, from Cree, from the lighting industry. Just get recommendations for, a PCB shop or battery supplier. And we go, work it out on the supply chain side. In terms of integration with bike industry products, that's a much more difficult thing. And I think a big part of that is just the fact that lights are very much a secondary thing for, let's take an e-bike, for example. It's not a requirement on e-bikes, at least here in the US. In the EU, there's some regulations around all e-bikes are treated as vehicles and have to come with a light equipped, but they can get around that by putting a cheap shit blinky light on the front and $5 good. They're not worried about having a higher end, high performance light in there because a lot of customers aren't asking for it. And if you have something permanently wired, a lot of people don't necessarily want that on their bike all the time. Let's say they never use it. Like half of the consumer base would never use a light. They just don't want it on there. It gets in the way. It can break in a crash, whatever. So kind of having something permanently wired that's more difficult introduces some challenges. And then there's global supply or market issues. Like Germany, for example, has regulations on bike lights. That's why that Ibisoso bike light was designed with a cutoff beam with sharp edges for commuting. It's because in order to sell in Germany, it has to be road legal, even though it's a mountain bike to be ridden off road. Like nobody's commuting on 170 mil travel, full suspension e-bike.
Don't say nobody.
Nobody.
You do live in Bellingham. Come on.
I have seen a few around town, including mine. But like in order to sell in Germany, they have to have it be road legal. So rather than have a different SKU for Germany and a different SKU for the rest of the world, they just have the one. And like that makes sense. I get it on a business level, and they might not have been able to make that choice. But this is, when it comes down to business, the light side of it, I would say that we're small fry. People aren't thinking about that. They're more concerned about making the bike like look nice so that people actually want to ride it and be seen on it around their friends.
My mind instantly goes to like make it like removable, so you could put in the Germany version, or you could put in the real mountain biker version, or you could put, what I mean, like that would be like modular of some aspect.
Yeah, and we've had those discussions with a couple of different OEMs actually who are pretty forward thinking, which has been great. And including Pivot, they've had some really unique ideas that I won't discuss here, but they are actively trying to make something that's better for the whole industry, not for them. And
right.
We've had those discussions going for like a year and a half now. Everything moves slow, but also I just haven't been able to push it because we've got a lot to do. And that kind of slice of an OEM market is very small relative to what we need to keep our business running and keep people employed. So when we get these new engineering hires in-house, that's one of our development projects, is kind of push towards, is it remotely possible to have a e-bike light accessory port standard? Because then we can have something that's clean, that's flexible, that's adaptable, that doesn't require a shop to wire stuff. There's just so many advantages to that. So I want to see it happen. We'll see if anybody takes us up on that.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, your light goes to like a walk mode in the like before it's going to die, right?
Yeah.
Or does it go?
Whenever it hits 5% remaining capacity, it goes down to low, just to give you time to, like, a visible warning where it steps down, and then give you time to get out of the woods.
And that's this. You said it's just the low setting though. It's not like it's not lower than low.
Not right now. We're messing around with that. I think what we'll probably do long term is we'll have it step down to low for 10 minutes or so, and then start tapering so that it'll get dimmer and dimmer. So just to kind of really extend the time that you have a non-zero amount of light.
Does it like blink or something like right before it's about to shut off, so or does it just like?
No. You get 10 seconds of pretty significant slow pulsing, so that you have time to, pull over. Your bike is about to lose all of its light.
You're about to be screwed, dude.
Do a complete stop. Please exit the trail. Because that was one of the, granted, it was because the battery pack failed. But, one of my buddies many years ago had a cheap shit light from China that the battery pack failed, and it failed in the middle of a downhill, and it was his only light. And so he went from seeing where he was going to nothing at 20 miles an hour and a obviously that was because of a failure that was going to happen anyways, but we don't want that to happen when the light turns off. We want you to know, hey, it's about to turn off. And it's weird enough that even if people don't read the instructions, they're going to be like, wait, something's wrong, and they'll probably pull over. So
that was my experience with another brand that, like, it just shut off on me when the battery died. And it's like, whenever I looked at the top of the hill, I had one square left. I don't know, one square is actually 1%. It could be all the way up to 20% because there's only 5 squares or something. You know what I mean? So it's like, I remember going down the hill, and it was like back whenever I used to just use one light because I thought that was fine. And it turned off, and I fortunately was able to stop with enough, fast enough that I didn't go off the side of the trail. But that was definitely the day where I was like, when I get home tonight, I'm buying a second light.
Yep. They serve multiple purposes, but also, shit happens out on the trail, and it's always better to have more than you need than not enough.
The reason I asked about the walk mode was because sometimes low is too bright, and let me explain my situation there. My situation is,
Nothing. Go ahead.
I missed it though. I just wanted to hear the joke.
I just said you were wrong.
Oh. Sometimes you're going on a really big ride, so you're trying to be battery conscious, and maybe you're on a road climb that's a back road, and really you don't need as much juice as low is putting off. You just really want to make sure there's not like a pothole in front of you, and that's about it. So those lights that would have a walk mode, that would be like, hey, I can squeeze out a little bit more power out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you're not the only one to come up with that request. And this kind of comes back to balancing what is the best product for the most people without adding necessary complication. I think that's a great idea. I would love to have that feature for myself for camping lights, where I'll just use my helmet light. I get back to camp and it's dark, and I just put it on ultra low and I'm walking around because I don't need 200 lumens to start a campfire or brush my teeth. And a lot from like bike packers. They want the same thing, where when they're going and it's like day 3 and 4 in the morning, they're not going at 20 miles an hour. They're zombies. They're barely moving. They just need enough light, and they don't want to carry more battery just to enable the, higher output.
Right.
So there's a lot of different, really good, legitimate reasons for a lower low. I think the approach will, and nothing is set in stone. The more feedback we get from customers, the more we'll change the product. But once we get to the point where we have, say, wireless remotes and we have some programmability options, kind of opens Pandora's box where, you could do that, then you could do anything. So do this weird thing that I want and this weird thing that nobody wants. But that one's like a really common thing. So being able to give some amount of programmability that's not so complicated that, you personally want low to be at 5% instead of 20% output, you can set that. And so that'll be.
I mean, that would be super cool if you could hook it up to your Outbound Lighting app and be like, I want medium to be at 40% and low to be at 5%.
This is where I'm torn too, because ultimately I think that an app is the easiest way to do it. Because like Knight Rider was one of the pioneers that did it a while ago, but they had a computer application before smartphones. I think it was after smartphones, but it was before like the Apple SDK and the App Store and all that. And you had to plug your light in and you could program it. And I think that was live for a year before it was killed off. And it wasn't because it was a bad idea. It's because nobody used it. Glowworm, they gave you the ability to change the number of modes, the order of them, the intensity, all of that. But they had one button and the main LED. And it was this, like, read the instructions, hold the button down. It'll flash 4 times slowly. And then you click once and it'll flash and you stop it on the right intensity. And it's like, it was so complicated that nobody used it. So the Glowworm moved on to an app. And it's so much easier to use. It's not without its flaws, but it gives them an immense amount of capability. I feel
but then you turn into a software development company as well. And then you're like, really? Do you want to go down that road?
Just like, I just don't want another app for things. Like, I don't want us to have an app. I don't want you to have to download an app to change something on your light. So we're playing around with some other approaches for that, but that'll be a lot of testing and a ways out. And if it's an app, if that makes the most sense and it's the easiest, cheapest way to do it, great. We'll do it, but that's a future question.
So are you guys still just direct to consumer? Do you have some retail out there? Or what's the approach there?
Yeah, so we're about 80% direct to consumer right now, give or take. I think last year we were 15% in store, and the year before that we were like 5%. So pretty small. Are
you, like, when you say store, are you bike shop, or are you like actual like retail chains you're trying to get? Like, is there a goal to be in like REI, or is it more like, we just want to be bike shops and online and that's that?
I mean, in an ideal world, I would prefer to just be online and in bike shops. I want to support a local shop down the street. I don't necessarily want to be on Amazon or in Jensen or anything like that. But from a business standpoint, like there comes a point where it doesn't make sense to resist some of those things. We're not there yet, but like REI, for example, massive conglomerate chain. Yeah, there'd be benefit because we would reach a new customer. There's a lot of customers that don't go to their local bike shop. They go to REI. There's a lot of customers that don't research online. They just go to REI and get what's there. That could be additional revenue, not, eating away from our current sales. And they've got massive reach. They've built a brand that's very strong. Same with Amazon. I do not like a lot of the business practices. I don't like having this gigantic tech monopoly, but at a certain point, Matt and I have had some pretty animated discussions about this internally at the company because I feel very strongly about this, but there comes a point where is that really the hill I want to die on? Like, does Amazon give a shit if we take a stand against them and say, screw you guys? No, but we need to do that in a very specific way. So like right now, I don't want to chase additional sales at the expense of our dealer network, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
We go to great lengths to not have sales, not have promos, not have deals all year round, except the one time around Black Friday where we have to because America. We do that so we're not undercutting bike shops. We don't want people to go to their bike shop, window shop, and then come buy it from us for cheaper online. Or we don't offer free shipping. You know, it costs us money to ship stuff. And if you want it faster, you pay more. But also because you could go into your local shop and buy it and not have to pay shipping. So you're saving money doing that. We definitely want to have a strong network of dealers. One, because we want bike shops to still exist. Not that them stocking our lights is going to be the difference in them succeeding or failing. But, you know, we want to support our local shops, but also it helps us with a support network where we have physical product in these different locales where, like, great example, we had a guy was doing the Tour Divide. I think it was last summer, riding from Canada to Mexico, and he was in Colorado, and his handlebar light failed. It just shut off. It wouldn't charge. It was totally non-responsive. That sucked. That's really rare, but even rarer for it to be working totally fine forever for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden in the middle of this event, in the middle of nowhere, where he's all self-supported. So I was able to call up a dealer that was basically on his route, took him 2 miles out of the way, and said, hey, you guys have one of these in stock on the shelf. Can you go charge it up? Make sure it's fully charged. When this guy comes in, just swap out his light. I'll get your return label to send the bad one back to me, and I'll send you a new one to replace the one from your stock so that you're not, out of pocket. And the guy was able to keep doing what he was doing, and he wasn't really put out by it. Like he finished.
That's rad.
Like I could not do that if we didn't have local bike shops. And that was memorable. Like that guy was super pumped, and I was just excited to be a part of it. It was fun to try to figure out like the best way to logistically make that happen. But I think long-term, larger distribution is definitely not out of the question, but when we do it, we're going to do it very strategically so that we're not doing it at the expense of our other supporters, and our bike shops are our supporters. So right now we have about 300 bike shops nationwide, and we're expanding that, but very slowly. We don't have sales reps. We don't have, I say a lot to people, I'm not a pushy salesman. One, because it feels gross, but two, if you don't want our stuff, I don't want to try to convince you that you need it. And it's the same way with shops. Like I don't need somebody to go into a shop and say, you have to have these things. It's a lot better for us and for the shop if the shop knows about us, or a customer tells them that they like this product, or they get to use it themselves. The shop knows the product better, so they're better able to speak to their customers. They're better able to support it, to make sure they're set up right, and product doesn't just sit on the shelf. Like it actually makes the shop money, and everybody wins. So right now it's not a deliberate slow play, but we're just trying not to be super pushy with it, so that the dealers that get added to our network are all strong dealers, and they know the product well, I guess.
Yeah. Right on, man. I think that you guys are you're at least I can speak for you. I know you're a mountain biker, so it makes sense why you guys are making mountain bike lights. But is there a world where you guys start looking at other sports?
Oh, sure. It's a ways away. It's not going to be next year. We've got enough products to release in the bike space. Between tail lights at various levels for different applications, e-bike lights, more economy commuter lights, higher performance, not necessarily higher performance lights, but advanced feature lights and accessories for fulfilling a lot of requests that we're getting for different use cases. So we've got a lot to do in the bike space, and then we're going to update our current products over time. That'll keep us busy. And
Do you see your lights being used like cross functionally already though? I would imagine, because of the like way that I feel like there's some pretty good features with your lights. I don't do these other sports like mountain climbing, or I don't know, do kayakers like do night kayaking? Maybe, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
I'll tell you a few of the more interesting use cases we've had. We've got a ocean search and rescue team putting them on ski-doos. That's pretty interesting. We've got people using them on snow blowers in the winter, where the lights are terrible and they need to go blow the snow, and this is the window they have to do it. We get a lot of skiing. People putting them on electric unicycles. That was a fun one.
okay.
And one wheels and scooters and things like that. Had one guy who was putting it on his hang glider.
Okay.
Has to have lights to go hang gliding at night legally, and it helped him with landings. And he could just kind of tilt the hangover up and light up the wings.
So now there's a new episode of like Ancient Aliens because this guy's flying around.
Pretty much, yeah. So they get used for a ton of stuff. I think that like the snow ski market, especially with like Vail Resorts taking over all these ski lodges and basically ruining them. There's a lot more people ski touring, and there's a lot of opportunity for that, for lights there, and a lot of customers that already do that, where they're dual sport athletes, like up here in Bellingham, Mountain Baker's an hour away, and a lot of people take their lights out and they'll go hike up the mountain at 4 a.m. and get fresh turns as the sun comes up. And
yeah,
there's
so which light are they putting on their helmet? They go on Portal or
a lot of them are using Hangover, but Hangover or Portal. And the benefit of Portal is that we actually made a point to more thermally isolate the battery itself from the heat sink, from the shell, so that the battery stays a bit warmer and holds in some of the heat more, so that the battery life isn't as affected by cold weather. So Portal is really going to be kind of an ideal setup for kind of the higher performance downhill skiers for sure, where a little bit of weight isn't a big deal, but they are hitting higher speeds and want that battery life. But a lot are just using GoPro head straps with Hangover on them if they don't have helmets. Ski with helmets. There's a lot of really cool use cases and a lot of people using them that way already. I think that something like running headlamps or like kind of camping activity headlamps is a request we get more often than anything, and that's like a really difficult market to get into because it's kind of already commoditized.
I just like, I don't know other sports, in terms of the application of light. So it would be really easy for me just to make the assumption that your bike light, because it goes on a helmet, that it would have everything that everybody else would want because, hey, it's just a light. But in my mind, it's like, yeah, there's some, like I was talking about those little flare lights on the gravel light, like that's very bike specific, where I'm sure if I was a kayaker or a climber, like maybe I would want a even smaller profile, but I'd be okay with it being wider, or I would want it to be, straight up and point 360 degrees around me instead, or you know what I mean? So I would imagine that there's some different like use cases.
Yeah, and I think that's where like skiing and snowboarding, snow sports kind of makes the most sense for cross-platform use of our current products, where the speeds and terrain are similar enough that it works really well for that. For runners, for example, that's less optimized because they're really designed to be mounted on a helmet. And if we're using like a head strap, the geometry kind of sticks them out too far and you get a little bit more flopping. But then also like wanting a 360 degree spread versus a narrower beam, you're not running at 30 miles an hour down a hill.
Right.
There are some people that run very fast. The majority of people that run at night are like 6 miles an hour or less. So that means you don't need to see 400 feet in front of you. But you definitely need to see your immediate vicinity better. And so you can make something a lot smaller and lower power with a different beam pattern to really optimize.
You want the beam to just go more down than you want it to go out,
Correct. Yeah, and that's where personally I would love to have camping headlamps with a cutoff beam so that I can talk to somebody and not blind them. Like that would be great. I just want to make that for myself. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways to like optimize a brand new product around those other use cases. And I think rock climbing is a good example, and like trail running. Those are pretty high volume use cases. But then you start getting into like, kayaking. There are plenty of people that kayak at night, not nearly as many as those who bike at night.
Yeah.
So it would not make sense for us to start a night kayaking division of Outbound, because it would be such a small market. We wouldn't make any money, and it would put the business.
Yeah.
So,
but like, so in that case, in my mind, I think about the kayak almost the exact same way I started thinking about the snowboard, where it's like, oh, if I had the Evo hangover, Evo's the bigger one, right?
mm-hmm.
So like on a snowboard, you could put the Evo on the board, and then you could put the hangover on your head, and then you'd have that light pattern whenever your board's pointing one way and your head is looking another way. And then the same thing would go with the kayak, because the kayak's not always pointing straight. Like, so you could have a bigger light with a wider beam pattern on the nose, but then I would want the headlamp to point, directionally, just like a mountain bike in that aspect. So are they waterproof in the, like, where you could just use those that way? Or is there like, do they need to be take some other precautions for that? Or
they probably should take some other precautions. So the way I describe it to people is, first of all, we cover water damage. If you happen to find a way to get water inside your light, we fix it. And they should survive anything that you'd see on a trail. But they're not dive lights. They are not rated for pressure. They're not rated for like power washing. To do that, we can do that. It would make them bulkier and thicker and heavier and more expensive, all the various things. It's definitely not impossible. I'm not trying to say that. We're just making choices to optimize around the specific use case. So on your bike, if you are submerging your light underwater, something horrible has happened. That's not going to be the worst of your troubles that day.
right.
On, say, like this Ski-Doo search team, rescue team, they sent us some emails earlier this week, like, hey, do you think this would be a good application for this? Here's the environment. Are these waterproof? And I'm like, they are, but if you're like at really high speed with high pressure salt spray, like that's a really tough environment. Right now, Portal is built for that. Portal, we changed the seal geometry and how we actually assemble the light to put more even seal pressure all the way around. Not just, where we're reliant on the stiffness of the shell to put pressure on the seal, but it's mechanically held down all the way around. And we have a separate tongue and groove seal for the top shell and for the optic. So there's no weird corners or points of ingress. So, Portal is actually pretty much set up to be pressure washed and sprayed. Please don't test that if you're an existing Outbound customer with a Portal. Don't deliberately try to destroy your lights, but that one I think will survive just fine. Like, that's part of our testing is we go out on wet, sloppy rides, and then afterwards I would just spend like 2 minutes spraying the light down just to try to kill it. And that one I'm pretty confident in. Evo and Hangover should be fine, but they are more susceptible to high pressure water spray. So I think when we'll probably start changing things over to a Portal like design architecture when we update them. And whether mountain bikes need it or not, we're just going to make them more in the direction of submersible, because I think we have a method to do that now that doesn't cause us to compromise on, say, the way we assemble the lights or the cost or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. So as it is now, you guys get all the parts and then assemble them where?
Yeah, right now, all of our electronics are done in Arizona. So we assemble the PCBs there. They're shipped to us in Chicago. Our hard parts are a mix. We get most of our hard parts now from a facility in Michigan, does injection molding. There's a few parts on older products on Evo and Hangover that are still overseas, but we've just been working to transition all of that to the US as much as possible. And then batteries, there's no domestic supplier of lithium ion batteries. Those all are coming from fab facilities in China or potentially Japan, but mostly China. So yeah, right now we are about as made in America as we can be. Everything's assembled in house, and so we spend a lot of time working on, automation, adding robots so that we can assemble things faster and more efficiently in house. We've got like one guy, Andy, who assembles every single light, and he used to be able to build
inspected by number one.
That's not a bad idea. We should put that. Well, there's a little paper tag in there with every light, inspected by. Yeah, he builds every light. And it used to be that he could build 75 to 100 a day. Now, depending on the product, he can build up to 400 lights in a day.
Wow!
Holy cow. It's and that's a lot of operational efficiency where it's not just him manually turning a screwdriver to do something, but having like a 0.8 torque limiting electric screwdriver, so he can just grab it, screw presenter, and done. And it's all consistent and repeatable. Having a tool where it's automatically dispensing thermal grease, so it's consistent, but he's just loading up a tray, putting in the tool, press go, and the tray will scan each part and dispense the grease. Then we can put the PCBs in, put the battery in. We have a soldering robot to come in and solder the connections. We're getting to the point where we're adding robotic arms to load boxes. As silly as that sounds, it's awesome. So right now that's all done in Chicago. Hopefully we'll be able to keep doing what we're doing, the same approach, because we like, and we're going to still build everything in house no matter what. Where we get the parts from, like I said, with batteries, we don't have a choice but to get those from overseas because there's no one in the U.S. that manufactures them. And the same goes for like the electronics components. Texas Instruments is a U.S. company. They make charge controllers, battery management systems. Those components are made in their fab in Taiwan or China and Thailand. So we can't get them made here, but those go into the Arizona facility to get populated onto the circuit boards, programmed and tested and sent to us. So is
there any new let me back up just a little bit. There's a lot of new electronic things out there with the cars and pretty much everything that we use in our life. So I would imagine that there's a path for batteries to get better and better at a much faster rate than it used to. So is there anything that's like on the horizon for like battery technology that you guys are excited about, where you're like, hey, this could cut our weight down by half and give us twice as much, length or something like that?
I don't want to be the pessimist. There's nothing I'm super excited about, but there's a lot of high potential things on the horizon. And the reason I say that is that there's a lot of companies that have been pushing, revolutionary, life-changing battery technology that has just been vaporware and never come to a point where it can be scale manufactured or even demonstrated. Like A123 Systems years ago had ultra high capacitors, super ultra capacitor, whatever. It was a dumb name, but it's basically replacing the battery with a capacitor that's high enough energy density that could effectively replace lithium-ion cells. Right now, that's like an order of magnitude off, like 10x off of current technology. So if that could happen, holy crap! Then we have something that doesn't require chemicals, that can enable huge high discharge powers, a lot more sustainable, safe, like all these different things. It never existed and still hasn't. And that started over 10 years ago. There's just fundamental flaws in that approach. There's some research in sodium cells that basically take the rare earth metals like the cobalt out of lithium ion and go to something based on sodium, which is much more readily available in the Earth's crust. But also the main benefits of that is not performance, not like energy density. It actually right now looks like it won't quite be at parity with lithium ion. So the lights might have to like bulge a bit or be a bit bigger, but they could be much cheaper, basically never need to be replaced because they have much better stability over time and could go through thousands and thousands of cycles without degradation. And they are so much safer. Like lithium ion cells in the right conditions can catch fire. They can explode. The sodium cells, like they have demonstrations of production ready stuff where they're basically stabbing the cells with knives, cutting straight through them, and they're not exploding. So you can have something that is inherently much more stable and just much better for consumer electronics in particular. Where I don't know that it would revolutionize anything, but man, if it was cheaper and able to be domestically sourced without rare earth metals and safer, okay, I would take that over a 10% performance increase just to make a product.
I think in terms of the mountain biking space, especially for the headlamp, it would just be like, can you get something that's lighter that lasts longer, or lighter that lasts the same amount of time? Because realistically, it's like, if you could put more lumens up there, it really comes down to how strong your battery is, right?
Yeah, there's a limit in terms of how efficient your LEDs are, which we're not at the like asymptotic limit where they can't get more efficient, but we're not going to see a 50% increase in LED efficacy. Like we're at the point where that is what it is, and we use a lot of them to make it as spread out and efficient as possible, like by dropping current density so the chips operate at a higher efficacy. But then you have battery capacity, like energy density. How much actual energy can you fit in something this size and weight without a nuclear reactor? And that's what decides your runtime. So you're not going to get 50% increase in lumens from any LED technology anytime soon. So that means it really all has to come from the battery for anything quote unquote revolutionary. Like if you want twice as much runtime, you need twice the energy density. And if you want,
so there's not a whole lot of like tweaking that you can do just like code wise. It like, I'm assuming that, okay, I guess the question, like DJI, they brought out that new bike. And it's, hey, it's more power and it's the same size battery and it lasts longer or something like that. But to me, that's like, okay, well, they figured out how to like better utilize the power that they have, right, through code. I would assume that there's not much room there for you to make those kind of like changes.
So it comes down to energy in or energy out. There's things that affect that. I want to talk about the DJI bike because I feel like that's a lot of like careful use of numbers and specifications to represent something that's not a single number, particularly the power rating, like continuous power versus peak power. And anyways, that's another discussion.
They got the electrical engineer in you just freaking all riled up when they threw out their marketing sheet.
Yeah. Basically, when I saw them launch with their specs, I was like, they're either lying or they've done something incredibly risky. And I say that meaning like, like the Bosch battery, it is a brick shit house. It is this gigantic aluminum enclosure that is impact rated, that is incredibly stiff and waterproof because they value safety and modularity over everything. They want, if that's going to be inside your down tube and you're going to impact your down tube on a rock or a log or something, they want that to never, ever be a problem. So that adds a bunch of weight. They could probably cut out 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds out of each battery at the same capacity by making it smaller and then have a smaller down tube. But then you're risking impact resistance. And I kind of immediately went to packaging thinking, oh, maybe they just really cut back, got super risky on packaging to like hit the highest possible performance numbers. But I also haven't seen one in a person. I think they're all locked up in customs right now.
I have no idea. But I heard they weren't selling them in the US. So whenever I heard that, I made an assumption that they signed some kind of deal with probably some major bike brands where they're like, oh, we won't sell ours in the US because we know you're going to be buying our motor. So, okay, that's kind of what I assumed happened. But I mean, I don't have any insider knowledge on that, so don't go buying stocks or anything. But
well, the only two snippets that I've heard lately is I know that DJI, because they're a big drone company, they've got some trouble with the U.S. government right now over spy drones or their drones being used for spy operations, and it's just one of these kind of political things where DJI is having their feet held to the fire, and one of the negatives of that is that their bicycles are basically being held up. So even if they could sell them in the US, they can't get them here. So that's one problem. But then also I saw that, Pink Bike had shown a sneaky shot of a Forbidden bike, or maybe it was Forbidden on their Instagram with a DJI motor.
Yeah, I figured that was coming. Somebody's doing it. Yeah.
There's probably, that's probably been in the works for a while with a bunch of different vendors. We'll see where that ends up. But
yeah, I'm really curious to see that bike. I mean, we're getting off topic, but what the hell, we're at the end of a few hours here. Like, I'm really curious to see that bike hit market and see how well it does when you have, a couple million people riding it. Like Fazua before it came out, like when you're hearing about it, you're like, dude, it's lighter and it's like, oh, it's like not as much power. It's going to be so awesome. And then Fazua hit the market and they were kind of fucked up for a while. You know what I mean? So it's one thing to take it to Eurobike and to like send it to a bunch of people that are, checking out the one that you've like meticulously made sure works perfectly.
Yeah.
Versus like putting it in the hands of like 10 million idiots that are going to do a bunch of dumb shit with it.
Right. Yep.
So
this, reminds me of George Carlin. Think of how dumb the average person is, and then realize that half of all people are dumber than that. It's, I don't mean that customers are dumb. I just mean that people find really creative ways to break things and find creative ways to use them and don't read instructions. It's once we get mass data, that'll be very telling and very interesting. And I think having it in like a Forbidden bike will also tell you, that'll separate the power system from the bicycle itself, because the DJI bike kind of just looks like a stump jumper ripoff. Maybe it's, geometry is good and it kind of, doesn't stray too much from the playbook. Maybe it works great, but Forbidden knows how to make a bike. So if the powertrain works, then that bike's probably going to be awesome.
There's zero part of me that thinks DJI wants to actually be a bicycle brand. It to me, it was like, here's a way for them to test something. Here's a way for them to like bring it to market without like the time frame of waiting for Specialized to finish their design, or let's just say a bike brand's going to take a year or two to bring something to market from whenever you present it to them. Whereas if they're making their own brand, they can reach out to, they're already in China, right? So they can reach out to the other manufacturers out there and be like, hey, make us a frame that's going to be ish, that's not going to step on anybody else's toes, that we can start playing around with,
I mean, hell, it might have even just been the way they demonstrated the performance of their system to these other OEs to get them to start designing their own bikes around it. And then to recoup their cost, they say, screw it, we might as well sell some of these. And then once the other OE brands take over, then we can kind of phase it out. Who knows? We'll see, especially with all the current political climate and like imports and like that. They may change their philosophy quite a bit, but I don't know. I'm just excited to see some more players in that market, just because there's so many different ways to do it. And DJI makes really good motors. They are very good at manufacturing motors. So
I think the idea of having a bike that weighs as much as like a Fazua style bike, but has the power of a full size like e-bike, that to me is tremendously like inspiring and like you want something like that. You know what I mean? So
could legitimately be revolutionary.
And I think the other plus side is that if they do that or have done that, immediately everybody else, even if they weren't in that path yet, are like, oh shit, we need to get like reverse engineer this damn thing, figure out how we can make it ours, however, or like, hey, we're hiring more people because that project that we were shooting for 3 years out, we need to get it to 2,
so to bring us back to your original question, like 20 minutes ago, you mentioned reverse engineering. One of the ways that you like talking about firmware and tweaks in the system to improve efficiency. I would say our system in terms of like power in versus lumens out, we're probably losing about 20% total like efficiency loss between optical losses, which is unavoidable at a certain extent, just because of transmission of photons from air to a material to air again, you just lose some amount. And then the driver losses to actually control the power through the LEDs. We're not just directly hooking up the battery. That's about 92, 93% efficient in our setup. And the reason I mentioned that is because we reverse engineer all our competitors' lights because it's competitive analysis. Why wouldn't we?
Right.
And there are some that do not use like a buck or boost LED driver topology. They just use linear regulators. And what that means in layman's terms is a LED driver is converting power from one thing next, kind of like a transformer on a telephone pole going from 5,000 volts down to 240 for your house. A linear regulator is just taking that power and burning it off to get you down to the lower level. So that means that if your LEDs are running at 3 volts, and you get 4.2 volts in, that over a volt is just being burned off as heat and wasted. So a linear regulator basically throws away 25% of your runtime right out of the gate to just save some cost on the electronics side. So there are ways if you have something like that, and I know some competitor lights who shall not be named because we've crapped on them enough this episode, still use your regulator design to save cost on lower end lights.
Yeah.
So they could take a big bump in runtime if they fix that. But for what we're talking about, like if we made everything into an ideal like physics version of what it is, that's like a 20% gain, which is not revolutionary.
Right.
Not
so it'd
that
be like a 20% gain, and you would also add like 60% cost or something like that.
Yeah, if we could even get all of that back, that's what it would be. So like the firmware side, there's definitely ways to screw it up, but it's there's not magic sauce in there. It's all about base level physics. So until we see, I think really it's going to be battery technology that's going to change things significantly. There's some interesting LED stuff, but again, it's little nips and chunks taken out. It's not big jumps anymore.
So I want to ask this question, and it's purely just because it entertains the shit out of me. One of your ads online is like the 1-star review, and the guy's like, I picked up the light and it's so bright it blinded me. Yep. I want a refund. Is that actually a real review, or you guys just thought of it and it would be funny for like marketing?
It is, but it's modified slightly. We have a couple other versions of that. Like there was one, we got a legitimate 1-star review that just said, no wires, 1 button, perfect. And that was it. But they clicked 1 star by accident, and it's like, okay, we'll just use that too. We do get some angry reviews that are just like, yeah, this should have a label on it, or this doesn't make sense to me. Like that's kind of where that came from. And then we just kind of changed the phrasing slightly. That all came from honestly, to give credit where credit is due, Snowbird hired a guy who I can't think of the name, but he came up with this ad campaign for Snowbird Ski Lodge where like no green runs, 1 star. Like they were real reviews, but they just talked about how gnarly the place is, and that's actually a great advertisement for people who want that. And turns out people love that. So I think we've had that ad running for probably 3-4 years now.
Every time it pops up, I laugh. So I mean, it still works.
We're gonna have, I think we'll have some more really silly ads with more robots and big inflatable version of me. They tend to get pretty silly and creative at headquarters. So Matt's got some ideas coming on the pipe.
Good stuff, man. I always like to ask people right at the end of the show, like, what YouTube channels do you like to watch, whether it has to do with bikes or not? What are you into?
Ooh, well, outside Brendan, he now lives down the street from me, and so we spent a lot of time doing silly things together. So it's fun to do stuff and then go see him like have a video on his jet powered bicycle that we got to actually ride around in the woods. Like that was really cool. And he's doing a lot with trying to educate people too, not just do silly things, but talk about how it works and why, which is pretty cool. And then a kind of weird one, but if you like car stuff, this guy called Super Fast Matt that is an engineering nerd, used to work at Tesla, and very dry, deadpan humor that really speaks to every engineer who has 1,000 side projects that never get done. Where he like took a 1950s Jaguar and put a Tesla drivetrain in it and is building a land speed racing car from scratch for fun just because. It's yeah, those are the two that I probably watch the most these days.
Right on, man. Good stuff, dude. I my algorithm just goes all over the place, so it's God only knows what I'm listening to or what I'm watching today. So good times, man. Dude, it's always fun talking to you, man. I had a great conversation and it went by extremely fast. So
yeah, I keep thinking like we're not going to sit here for 2 hours and talk, and then
yeah,
it was quick.
yeah. 2 hours later, we're like, man, we didn't even bullshit about regular stuff. We just talked about lights the whole time.
Nice.
Sweet, man. Well, anybody out there listening, if you haven't checked out Outbound Lighting, definitely give them a look at their websites in the show more of the YouTube video, or you can click in the show notes of the podcast and get over their website, check out their stuff. I definitely have retired every other light system that I have, and I'm only using theirs, and that's not because of anything other than the product is just superior. So it's definitely that much better. So don't be that guy that's like, I don't want to spend the money, because it's totally worth it. So anyways, go check them out. And if you want to do something for free, just remember this: it only takes a bike to be a biker. Get out and be one.